Welcome to Sharing the Middle, where recovering perfectionists, overachievers, and anyone in the middle of a struggle come together to learn to embrace the messy middles of life. I'm Lacey, your friend in the middle and guide, whose claim to fame this week is getting this podcast to you all. I know it's been a little sparse around here lately. We're doing some really cool things over at No Shame in the Home Game and the new To Come Joyful support movement. If you're a new listener or an old one, I've got illness and children, and your girl's doing her best. I am really excited to share today's episode with you. I found Rebecca Stewart on TikTok last year. Her chill mobility has really helped me think about my body and moving it in ways of what it needs, not necessarily what other people tell me to do. I kind of instantly fell in love with Rebecca, and she's kind of one of those souls for me that I'm just so drawn to, and you'll, hear that in this episode. I'm so excited for you to hear it. We're coming up on the year anniversary of Sharing the Middle, and we've got some changes coming and all those things. So I just wanted to again say thanks for being here. I love sharing the middle with you. And let's jump right in. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Rebecca. I have been a fan of yours on TikTok for a long time. And so I was like, you know what? I'm just going to shoot my shot and see if she'd be willing to chat with me, because I love the Chill Mobility series. That's what kind of pulled me into your account. But I also just love your kind of philosophy about fitness, which can be really intimidating for a lot of people. And with all this like diet culture, and it's a really scary space. And I find you to be a very comfortable spot in that very scary space. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is like the biggest compliment I could ever receive. Like, it makes me honestly tear up whenever I get a comment that like someone feels like I'm a safe space, because that's all I want to bring to the fitness world. So thank you. I really appreciate
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being that, because, you've got your post about drink water, and I'm like, oh yeah, have I drank water? I'm usually pretty good. We have a very hydration oriented household. Both of my children are the most hydrated children you'll ever meet. My husband, we all have giant water bottles.
Amazing.
But every once in a while I'm like, wait, I haven't drank out of my water today. Thank you.
Yeah, if you're listening right now, make sure you take a sip of water.
Take a sip. You know what? I'm going to take a sip right now. I've got my water right here.
Me too. Let's do it.
But why don't you introduce yourself in your own words for the listeners?
I always struggle with this. Yeah. I never know what's going to come out. But I am a fitness coach, ability and strength specialist. And I came into the fitness world in the height of diet culture. My goal is to just create an inclusive and accessible and supportive space for people to be in fitness, because so much of the fitness world that a lot of us grew up in is not that, or was not that. And I think we're still trying to shift the mindset that exercise can look like a lot of different things, and it doesn't have to be like an all-out go hard or go home type of workout. Even moving your body for just a little bit can make a big difference. So that's kind of what I do in this space, to just try and make the fitness world a little better.
And I believe you are. So way to go.
Thank you.
I have a silly kind of question. I know what mobility is, but would you be able to define that?
Sure. Yeah. So mobility is working through the end range motion or mobility. No, I should take that word out there. Let's start over. You can't define a word by using the word. So mobility is using your body through the end range of motion you have in your joints. And mobility work helps us to increase the range of motion that we have. So it's a little bit different from flexibility, in which your body is just moving typically a little more passively. Mobility is the active range that you have with your body. Does that make sense?
So much sense. And because that's what I've always been trying to figure out, is the difference between mobility and flexibility, because my brain kind of sees them at the same thing. We'll start with our first question. When you first heard the middle, what was your initial reaction?
The middle to me really feels like that space between where you have been and where you want to be. I was an athlete growing up, and so I've always been the person that's like setting goals and doing all that kind of stuff. But I have found too, because I have multiple chronic illnesses too. I know that you understand that
I do.
world. Sometimes the middle can be not being able to see what the end is. I feel like sometimes with chronic illness, we just live in the middle.
We do.
That is life.
Which is part of the reason why I started this thing, is because I was like, oh, there is no cure for what I'm going through. I just have to figure this out and figure out what life looks like here. There's no finish line or magical drug or treatment, that kind of thing. We can jump right into your middle moment we were going to talk through.
I feel like mine's a little bit twofold, but this most recent chronic illness journey, I'll say, because I've been through a lot of them at this point. I think like 4 or 5 of them. I don't even know.
It is like a collector's edition. I have, like, before my life-changing one, I guess. I'm like, I got a couple of those, so I get it. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyone that's been in that like chronic illness diagnosis stage, some of them are very cut and dry, but some of them are not at all. And that was my most recent experience. I started having these symptoms as early as like December 2020, and it was really impacting my life and my ability to do my job and the way that I was able to move my body, which is huge when I'm like in the fitness world and my body is my job.
Sure.
So I was having all these wild symptoms. It ended up taking me 5 doctors to get some form of a diagnosis. But that was just back in July, early August. So I still feel like I'm in the middle because it's not really an official diagnosis. This medication seems to be helping. So we'll continue to write it up and see what happens.
I do know. From my own experience, it's interesting to hear you say, well, I have kind of a diagnosis, which is relatable for me. But this idea that like a diagnosis feels like it's like a goal you're trying to achieve. And even when you get it, you're like, wait, maybe it's not an end point. And it's really hard and confusing to be able to even define anything, even when you get a definition of what's going on.
Yes. It almost feels like a diagnosis in the chronic illness world is like the new beginning of the middle, because now you're just like starting over your life with this new context, but it never really is going to end for the most part.
I also find diagnosis is about other people, not about you. It's about being able to tell other people what's going on. It's about being able to tell doctors, insurance companies, all that stuff, what's going on. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change what you're going through in a lot of cases, because most chronic illnesses I've found don't have that clear-cut answer. There aren't like, oh, we treat it doing this and this. It's like, let's throw all these different things at it and see what happens. It's one of those things that you're like, I feel that I've been like reaching for, but the more that I get closer to one, I'm like, oh, this is for everybody else.
Yeah, that's so real. I just started working with a therapist shortly after I got this like pseudo diagnosis. And she was talking to me and she was like, so how does it feel? Because she's amazing. She's actually previously a nurse that worked in complex medical cases. So I feel really blessed to have found her. I feel like she's the perfect fit for me. But she was like, so how does it feel? And I was like, and maybe this is because I have been through so many diagnoses at this point. I was just like, oh, it just feels like another day, Like now I just keep moving forward and hopefully we have more information. Hopefully things are going to start feeling better. At the end of the day, there's nothing I can do to change the fact that I have it.
I also wonder, and we don't have to talk about this if you don't do, but I know that you have type 1 diabetes, which makes everything way more complicated. And I'm curious if that prevented you from getting diagnoses because everyone wanted to attribute everything to that.
That's a good question. Yeah, I think more so, not as much the diabetes, but I do also have PCOS.
Oh, preach. Woo, woo.
And I found...
That's one of mine too. I'm like, I got that one, check mark.
Yeah.
I got that one, check mark.
Because one of my major symptoms with this most recent diagnosis was I gained 85 pounds in about a year and a half.
Holy moly.
And Yeah, talk about a huge change. And a lot of doctors just wanted to attribute it to that because they were like, that happens with PCOS. And I was like, yeah, but like I just had this gut instinct that something else was going on.
As a person with
Yeah.
PCOS, it happens, but it doesn't usually happen if you know you have PCOS and you're managing it.
Right.
And so that has always been a marker for me as well. Like, hey, something else is going on here because I'm doing the same stuff I was before. I'm taking all the medicines you guys want me to take, and it's still happening. So at some point, we have to recognize I don't have control over that, which I could get on a soapbox about PCOS and how unsupportive so many doctors are because they don't understand, and it's probably because it's very poorly defined. I don't know. It's fine. But
yeah.
And everyone's trying their best. And because PCOS itself is such a bucket of symptoms. So for me, when I was, I'm going to list mine. You don't have it. But so I have Hashimoto's.
Yeah, I
have Hashimoto's, so I have, which is a thyroid issue. So I take thyroid medicine every day. I have my PCOS and I have anxiety. And so when I started to not feel right, I was constantly attributing it to those things. Not as much the Hashimoto's, because I'm like, no, I got this. I have a deficient, like the logic of my hormones aren't changing that much. I'm still taking my medicine every day. It shouldn't have this. Yeah. But PCOS and anxiety, they're real easy to attribute everything to. And it took me a while to even recognize that what was going on with me was so different because of those things. And so I'm always just curious about others' experience with that, because when you have one chronic illness, you are more likely to have another chronic illness. Same with like autoimmune diseases. If you have one autoimmune disease, you're more likely to have another one. Yet it still feels like an uphill battle to get people to take you seriously about them.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel that because obviously the type 1 diabetes, that was my first diagnosis back in 2007. And then I was like riding the coattails, didn't have any other issues until 2020. I was diagnosed with both PCOS and ADHD. And so I had started on some ADHD medication just to see if I was having big problems with memory and concentration and like gaps in my memory, not being able to like remember things that had happened in the past. And first of all, I had told multiple doctors that, and it just like seemed to go over their head. And I was like, that seems like something that we should talk about.
It's a big deal, right?
Right. But so I tried ADHD medication and nothing really seems to help, which was another indication to me that something is going on more so than just like what I'm currently already dealing with.
Absolutely. And trusting and learning your own body is one of the hardest things going back to, I blame diet culture for, I don't want to say I blame diet, but I've always been big. So my entire life, I was always the tallest girl in the room. I was always big. I'm big boned. I could lose 100 pounds and still be big. That's never going to change for me. And so my whole life, I have been fighting my body to not be big. And I've never trusted my body because of that diet culture, because 7th, 8th grade, I'm trying diet. So it's been radical, really, for me the past year. I can actually trust that my body's telling me something. And I imagine for you to go through such a big change in something that's your job, like your physical job, had to have been really tough. So I would love to hear more about that kind of part of this middle.
Yeah. I have aligned myself with body neutrality, which is just accepting your body the way that it is. And I don't think that you have to love your body. I think that's a really hard step for a lot of people. Just being able to appreciate everything that your body does for you, and the fact that, in my opinion, weight gain and weight loss are neutral and weight maintenance is neutral. So there's nothing bad about either one. But the quickness with which I gained the weight that flagged my brain, something is wrong. Like people don't just up and gain I was gaining like 15, 30 pounds in a month.
Oh my God.
That's not normal.
No, especially if your job is fitness
Yeah.
related. So it's not like you're doing nothing.
Yes. Yeah. And if anything, I was more active than I had been pre-COVID, because pre-COVID I was working a desk job. I worked at a nonprofit. So I was more active after the pandemic started than I had been before. And I hadn't changed anything about my diet or my eating habits, or was more active than not. But I would go to doctors and they'd be like, just try and eat a little bit less. And I'm like, but you never asked me how much I'm eating to begin with.
Yeah.
That was a really hard part of because movement is such a huge part of what I do. Like, I would have to modify. I had not competing right now, but had been a competitive power lifter. So I had to modify the way that I was lifting weights because my body had changed so much, and ended up injuring my back a little bit because of that at one point. And just being able to, I was so fatigued with everything that was going on with my health. My joints were in pain all the time. My muscles were in pain all the time. So just trying to like change weights out, rack weights for my clients, and move through my day and be as active as I needed to be, my body was screaming at me that something was wrong.
I also just want to take a minute and say thank you and kudos in your explanation of how the weight gain does not have anything to do with you and your self-image. Like, it changed the way you lived your day-to-day life. And I think a lot of times when people are talking about weight gain, they're only thinking about that physical appearance aspect and, other people and that kind of stuff. And I think that's something that I've had a hard time figuring out in the body positivity space of like, where are those lines? How do we talk about our bodies when there is something wrong and the weight gain is a problem, but it's not because it's a problem in itself. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it's not necessarily just a problem for your appearance, which it can be for some people. And I think it's totally valid too. If people do want to change their appearance, I'm fine with that. But the way that your body moves through space and the way that, you're able to get up and down from the floor or bend over or something can be drastically impacted by how your body feels.
Sorry, now my brain is just really going into the physicality of the middle that I haven't really thought about before. About that.
Yeah.
Sorry, my brain is like literally going in 20 different directions right now. So I apologize for my stammering.
Yeah.
But
let's do it.
It is so interesting though that our body is always in a state of middle, right? It's always in some kind of process doing something. And we are always in the state of middle because you're born, your body's always doing something, and you die. And so it's just interesting to think about the body's experience of the middle. I didn't mean to get super deep, I promise.
No, absolutely, because our bodies are meant to shift, and they do that sometimes to protect us. Sometimes it's in response to stress that we're going through, or sometimes it's a response to change in lifestyle habits. Sometimes it's just in response to like when people get pregnant, their body has to shift. If you want to talk about body shifting in one way or the other, that's a huge example of that.
Heck yeah.
I haven't been through it, but you have.
I have twice. I would not recommend it to people. My children are the greatest gift I've ever had in my life. I love them more than anything, all of that stuff. But pregnancy was very difficult for me. But I think I also kind of, the more that we talk about it, I'm like, as women, I think it is probably a little different for men where they go through puberty and then they're just consistent the rest of their lives. Now, there's, of course, aging and whatnot, but like women have a cycle every month. They go through puberty and menopause. They have the opportunity potentially for pregnancy to change their body. And so I do think that there is something about the physical female body that is in more flux and is more change. And I think that probably traditional medicine has not clued in on that because I would agree there's so many things that it's like, oh, they didn't know this about women's bodies 20 years ago. And I'm like, wait, I was in high school and we didn't know about this.
Because women weren't included in research studies until, I don't know the exact date, but it was not that long ago that women started have to included in research studies.
Yeah, and I bet in the fitness space especially, which is very masculine, male dominated, there's also this element of you do this to get this outcome, and women's bodies are just so different in a lot of ways when it comes to their chromosomes. And I just want to say I'm using the term women very loosely here.
Yeah.
We're talking about chromosomes, which is different than gender. I just want to be very clear. But yeah, it's very... Sorry, now my brain was like, oh, and then for those who are trans, they're in a shit. Okay, I need to calm down.
A whole different...
I know. Yeah. And so my brain is just really going through how this change and this process, especially thinking about this, where you are and where you're going, is inescapable.
Yeah. The body is so complex, and a lot of fitness culture, diet culture on the internet, it's hard because we have to like put out content generally that's so quick so people will pay attention to it. But because of that, it turns into all this polarizing thinking. It's either this way or it's this way. And there's so much nuance in the middle that doesn't really get a lot of attention on social media because it's just harder to get that to quote unquote go viral or get the views or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, the body is so complex and it can't be boiled down to just A or B most of the time.
I think that's a really great transition because I also want to know about where you came up with chill mobility and how that became what it is, which I think is really cool.
Thank you. So yeah, chill mobility for me was just born out of necessity of getting myself to move again. Going through this chronic illness piece, it's interesting to look back on now that I feel like I'm starting to get to a more positive side in my mental and physical state. Things are changing in a positive way now that I've started on some new medication. Looking back, I was in a terrible mental space and physical space, to be honest. Like last summer, fall, winter, I was, if we want to get real candid, like questioning whether life was worth it anymore, if I was going to make it to 35 or 40 with the way that my body was so rapidly declining. And my body felt so bad all the time. And I, as a movement is my rage. If I couldn't get myself to do my mobility work, I was like, I need to have some sort of accountability out there that if I can just... The very first chill mobility video I put out there, I sat down with my coffee and I told myself, it says in the video, I can have an extra cup of coffee this morning if I do my mobility work. And so I just put the camera up, I recorded it, and I did a little voiceover. I wasn't expecting anything out of it. I was just like, if I put these videos out, maybe it'll help one person to learn that 5 minutes or less of movement can make such a big difference in their life.
And I want to chime in, and it's movement that is so accessible. Yeah. So for me as a person with a chronic illness who was basically bedbound, it's like, wait, I have the capacity for a minute or two to sit up, and like I would move like from my legs to have better hip mobility. I don't remember which one, but it was just like, I could do that. And for me, fitness is still a big question mark because if I, with chronic fatigue syndrome, that could make me go backwards, but it also could help me build it up. And it's a big old question mark, and I'm still trying to figure it out. But knowing, well, I can do this one thing for my body today of just a few minutes of this mobility. And it's different than stretching, which I actually really like that it's different from stretching, because stretching feels because I'm not flexible. I'm like one of the least flexible people you'll ever meet. My whole family is. But my body can move. It can move from here. It can move from here to here. And so to be able to do those things that, hopefully, I need to be better about it, that it could be something you do for the rest of your life to keep you moving. So I just wanted to pause there and say that it's very accessible when we talk about movement. We're talking about the movement you do every day, that when you do this mobility, it makes your day-to-day life feel better. Because I don't know about you, I'm never like, oh, good stretch, I'm going to be a better person tomorrow. That doesn't usually happen. But with the mobility, I could tell the difference that my muscle and joints are moving different. Yeah.
Yeah. What I like to say is that mobility helps you move with more ease and less pain.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's you do it in the morning before you start the day so you feel a little bit better, or if you work a desk job, or, if you're bed bound or chair bound, sometimes just a little bit of movement can help those like aches and pains and tightness that you feel and shift it out just enough that things feel a little bit better. And that's my goal with True Mobility, is just to help people just feel a little bit better, because that can make such a huge
It
impact.
really can. It really can. And I think I didn't understand that
Yeah.
until I couldn't do things. And I think it's sad that a lot of times
Mhm.
we don't necessarily appreciate something until you can't do it. When I'm talking, when I try to help like my mom understand what I'm going through, I'm like, okay, I want you the next time you go to a shower, think about every time you lift your arms up. If that is hard for you to do, can you see
Mhm.
where, man, showers are just take a lot? Or loading the dishwasher. How many times do you bend down to bend back up when you're doing the
Mhm.
dishwasher? And it's those little
Mhm.
things that can be really hard, specifically for me and what I go through. And so I recognize now, oh, when my body does this, it is something. It's not nothing, and I appreciate it.
I have one in-person one-on-one
Uh-huh.
client that I started working with recently and doing some mobility work and strength training. And they had a pretty severe shoulder injury. And in the shower or like putting on deodorant, couldn't reach around to even touch their other side of their armpit. And now, since starting doing mobility work and strengthening that shoulder, they can reach over and do that for the first time in years. And you just think about the impact that has on your life if you can shift even that much to be able to move
Mm-hmm.
to a place that you couldn't before. Like, that has an impact on your daily life.
Absolutely. And all the places you can go now. Absolutely. I
Yeah.
do usually like
Yeah.
to bookend our conversation with a piece of advice because I love a good takeaway or tangible. So,
Mhm.
what piece of advice would you like to maybe either give yourself previously, other people? What would you like to say?
Yeah, I think it works in both accounts for the chronic illness and the fitness
Uh-huh.
mobility space. Just that the one thing that I always had to hold on to in the last year was that there's always hope that things can get better. And sometimes you just need to find one thing to hold on to. Used to imagine my future self
Mm-hmm.
a year ago. I would imagine my future self just saying, wait for me because things, oh my God, I'm going to cry. Wait for me because things are going to get better. And if you can have one thing that you can hold on to, whatever that is, whether it's reaching out to a friend or knowing like just moving a little bit every day is going to make you feel a little bit better, find one thing to hold on to because that can make all the difference.
I really love that. I also, it's very timely for me because we're almost to what I'm calling like my year anniversary of it's disability really, where my life drastically changed. And I didn't know where I would be a year from then. So to think of like
Yeah.
me then to see me now, hey, you're still working through it. Look at all this cool stuff. That's really cool. So thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. I think it's important too to life is always going to have its ups and downs, but when you're in the downs, there's only up to go.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's a cliche thing that everybody says, but there's always hope that things can get better. You never know what could happen tomorrow or a year from now.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find you?
Yeah.
All of that good stuff.
Yeah, I'm on all the social medias at RebeccaStewart.co. And I think I gave
Yeah,
you the
I'll put those
links.
all in the show notes.
Perfect. But yeah, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok. I'm much more active on TikTok, but I'm trying to get into the YouTube space. I have some plans. It hasn't happened yet, but we'll see.
It's so much work. That's why, like, we're recording this video. Will I ever do anything with it? Probably not, because it's so much
It is. It really is.
So I don't blame you at all. Thank you for sharing the
Yeah.
middle with me today. I really appreciate it, and for sharing and being vulnerable. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for doing this because I told you by DM a while back I was going through a really tough time this summer
Mm-hmm.
and listening to one of your episodes. I don't remember who was on it, but it was an episode about grief. And that really helped me in that period of time that I was in. So I thank you for starting this and doing what you're doing, because it's making a difference.
Oh,
really
thank you. I needed to hear that today too. Thanks for sharing the middle with me. As always, I hope you've been able to see a little bit of yourself in the story we shared today. Don't forget to follow, share, rate, review, and follow me on social media at Lacey Shares. You can always check out the Joyful Support Movement at joyfulsupportmovement.com and see all of the amazing goodness we have there, like No Shame in the Home Game, Pops of Joy, courses, resources, and of course, the Joyful Support Village. All right, now go out there and spread some joy.